Welcome to the Community Church of Chapel Hill Unitarian Universalist Virtual Sunday Service. My name is Susan McDaniel. I am a member of the Worship Associates Ministry here at the church. I want to welcome each of you to our online Sunday service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you came to be with us today, you are welcome here.
Hello, fellow congregants. My name is Heather O'Connor, and I serve as the president of your Board of Trustees for the Community Church. Over the last 10 years, I've been a volunteer in the religious education classroom and a member of the youth ministry team. I'm delighted to say that my kids are active in and engaged with the really great youth programming of our church. As a volunteer, I've seen firsthand how Marion and Kat have created wonderful opportunities for children and youth in our church. Despite the pandemic, Marion and Kat have created pure magic for our kids this year. Even in our virtual world, they continue to inspire and empower youth staff like Alan Reese and Jenny Nelson to new heights of leadership. And I'm really proud that my daughter, Erin Gottschalk, is following in their footsteps. The annual pledge drive is just 2 weeks away. This important fundraising opportunity fuels all the amazing programming our church puts on and pays the salary of our dedicated staff. The annual pledge drive allows us to bring worship, music, programs for children and youth, adult programs and activities, our social justice projects, and all the things that we enjoy as a community. The annual pledge drive will kick off on Saturday, March 20th in the evening with an entertaining pledge-a-thon emceed by yours truly and the very funny Matt Zeman. We'll be asking everyone in our community to make their pledge that night or soon after the event. Thank you for your generosity and participation, which supports our beloved community.
Many give their time in the fight for freedoms. Many give their lives in the fight for freedoms. Let us cherish the many freedoms we are privileged to have. Let us fight to keep these freedoms. Let us fight for others' rights to these freedoms. Let us stand and march and lay our bodies down for freedom. Come, let us celebrate freedom and worship together. Please join me in reading today's Chalice lighting words, number 453 in the gray hymnal. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
This morning's reading is by Desmond Tutu and is number 593 in the gray hymnal. Liberation is costly. Liberation is costly. Even after the Lord had delivered the Israelites from Egypt, they had to travel through the desert. They had to bear the responsibilities and difficulties of freedom. There was starvation, and thirst, and they kept complaining. Many of them preferred the days of bondage and the flesh pots of Egypt. We must remember that liberation is costly. It needs unity. We must hold hands and refuse to be divided. We must be ready. Some of us will not see the day of our liberation physically, but those people will have contributed to the struggle. Let us be united. Let us be filled with hope. Let us be those who respect one another.
Daylight again, following me to bed. I think about 100 years ago, how my fathers bled. I think I see a valley covered with bones and blue. All the brave soldiers who cannot get older, they're asking after you. Hear the pastor calling from Armageddon's side, when everyone's talking and no one is listening. How can we decide? Do we find the cost of freedom buried in the ground? Mother Earth will swallow you. Lay your body down. Find the cost of freedom buried in the ground. Mother Earth will swallow you. Lay your body down. Lay your body down.
Freedom's Just Another Word. The Remix. A sermon for March 7th, 2021. Let me set up what I'm going to do in this morning's sermon. See, way back in my first few months of my first ministry, in November of 2003, I gave a sermon called Freedom's Just Another Word. It's a sermon that I've always found memorable. And so what I decided I'm going to do this morning is take a trip down memory lane. Go back to that sermon that I gave more than 17 years ago, more than 600 sermons ago, and ask whether that sermon still holds up, and inquire how my own understanding of freedom has or hasn't changed all these years and sermons later. See, it's such a memorable sermon for me, in part because I remember the creative process so well. I remember sitting down to think about the sermon, and all of a sudden I had caught an earworm. My toe was tapping, and I was singing to myself the song I'm Free, the 1965 classic by the Rolling Stones. I'm free to do what I want any old time. Classic rock and roll freedom song, right? I'm free to do whatever I want, whenever I want. That's certainly one understanding of freedom. And no sooner did I make a little note of that tune than I caught another earworm. Lynyrd Skynyrd's 1973 Southern rock ballad, Freebird. Yes, I sang Freebird to myself. I'm as free as a bird, and this bird you cannot change. Not freedom to, but freedom from. And no sooner had I made a note about that than I caught a third earworm. Crosby, Stills, and Nash's Find the Cost of Freedom, which Erich played for us a little earlier in the service. Find the cost of freedom. Buried in the ground, Mother Earth will swallow you. Lay your body down. My understanding is that Stephen Stills wrote that song after being deeply moved while visiting a Civil War battleground. But the song was released in 1970 as the B-side to Ohio, Crosby, Stills, and Nash's tribute to the student protesters killed at Kent State. Find the cost of freedom, the linking of freedom to sacrifice and struggle. And then I caught a fourth earworm, Janis Joplin's 1971 recording of Me and Bobby McGee. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. A complex and paradoxical view of freedom. In the words of Chris Christopherson, who wrote the song, it presents freedom as a double-edged sword. And then I thought to myself, why am I singing all these songs from before I was even born? And I thought of freedom songs from my own adolescence. Soon enough, I was humming the immensely catchy song Freedom 90 by George Michael. It's a song about the perils of fame and claiming one's own identity, but that song would soon be claimed as an LGBTQ anthem, a song about the freedom to be who you are. There's something deep inside of me. There's someone else I've got to be. And then I caught my sixth and final earworm. In 1989, Neil Young released Keep on Rockin' in the Free World. This political song was a scathing indictment of American society and politics in the late 1980s. We've got 1,000 points of light for the homeless man. We got a kindler, gentler machine gun hand. We got department stores and toilet paper. Got styrofoam boxes for the ozone layer. Keep on rockin' in the free world. The song problematizes freedom by asking, what exactly does freedom mean? What exactly can freedom mean in the midst of systems of poverty and violence and environmental degradation? So I had 6 songs, 6 earworms, 6 different approaches to freedom. Freedom to do whatever you want any old time. Freedom from others telling you what to do. This bird you cannot change. but also freedom as a struggle requiring sacrifice, find the cost of freedom, and freedom as absence and even loss, just another word for nothing left to lose. There's also freedom as liberation, the freedom to be exactly who you are. And there is a cynical rejection of freedom. This sense that freedom is a myth. Keep on rocking. Keep on rocking in the free world. So which of these was the real freedom? It occurred to me that when the Stones and Stephen Stills and Janis Joplin wrote those songs, sang those songs in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a robust conflict going on in our society about the meaning of freedom. And when George Michael and Neil Young sang about freedom in the late 80s, there was a robust conflict about the meaning of freedom in our society. And when I preached this sermon in 2003 for the first time, there was a robust conflict about the meaning of freedom. And now as I remix this sermon for March 2021, now there is a robust conflict about the meaning of freedom. So what is the real freedom? I'd like to propose a humble test. The humble test goes like this. We should be suspect of anything we call freedom if we can't turn it into a good song. We should be suspect of anything that's called freedom if we can't turn it into a song, if it doesn't sing. This past week, Texas and Mississippi lifted their mask mandates and said businesses can go back to operating at full capacity. They did this in the name of freedom. That's freedom, right? No, it really isn't. Having to stay home because an unchecked pandemic is killing people doesn't sound like freedom. Winding up on a ventilator in the ICU sure isn't freedom. That's a lousy song. There's currently a debate heating up in our society about a $15 minimum wage. And some say that a minimum wage is an assault on the freedom of people to run their businesses as they choose. And that's a lousy song. Others say the fact that someone can work full-time in our society and still live in poverty, that's an insult to freedom. That'll sing. I think Woody Guthrie wrote that song. Think about the many North Carolina license plates where there's that motto, first in freedom. My license plate says first in flight, but many license plates say first in freedom. How would you even measure that? Well, you could ask whether it sings or not. And I can tell you that being among our nation's leaders in voter suppression and gerrymandering does not make us first in freedom. That's not a song that freedom sings. Dumping coal ash in rivers does not make us first in freedom. Freedom doesn't sing that song. And our nation leading the world in mass incarceration does not make us first in freedom. Freedom does not sing that tune. How do we reconcile? How do we reconcile competing notions of freedom? Let me tell you how I resolved it when I preached the sermon 17 years ago. When I preached the sermon 17 years ago, I did a deep dive into what we might think of as the paradox of freedom. And I said that true freedom is found in that paradox. And here's what I mean by the paradox of freedom. It's found in an old story, probably the world's most famous liberation story of the Israelites and the Exodus from Egypt. The book of Exodus, it begins with the story of Moses being called by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. There's plagues. There's Pharaoh's heart being hardened. There's the crossing of the Red Sea. And then there is what comes next, which is the second half of the book of Exodus, and Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy. See, the next 3.5 books of the Hebrew Bible consist of largely the revealing of no fewer than 613 commandments, 613 commandments given by Yahweh, detailing the way in which the Israelites will organize their whole civilization. Now, there is actually an anti-Semitic prejudice, trope, about Judaism being a legalistic faith, which is actually untrue. But there is, in the Hebrew Bible, there is this wonderful and paradoxical truth about liberation, which is that true liberation, true freedom, is actually tied to discipline and to responsibility. Find the cost of freedom, as it were. Archbishop Desmond Tutu makes this same point in the reading that Susan read earlier in the service. Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "Liberation is costly. Even after the Lord had delivered the Israelites from Egypt, they had to travel through the desert. They had to bear the responsibilities and difficulties of freedom." The responsibilities and difficulties of freedom. I think about how in Unitarian Universalism, freedom is said to be a core principle, but it is a freedom tempered by, balanced by, responsibility. And so my answer to that question, which is the true freedom, when I preached that sermon 17 years ago, more than 17 years ago, was that the true freedom is found when freedom is tempered by and balanced by responsibility. So now it's 17.5 years later. What did I miss? When I went back and reread that sermon, I was struck by something that I completely missed all those years ago, that never even occurred to me. It honestly never occurred to me to realize that all 6 of those songs, those earworms that shaped my sermonic thinking about freedom, were composed by white men. 5 out of the 6 were performed by white men. And I kind of wonder how I would think about freedom differently, how I would write about freedom differently, how I would preach about freedom differently. If the songs, the earworms that I had hummed had been freedom songs sung from the perspective of those who had had their freedom threatened, their freedom denied. What sermon would I preach if I had hummed Nina Simone's I Wish I Knew How? Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come? Bob Marley's Redemption Song, these songs of freedom are all I ever had. Or even Freedom by Beyonce featuring Kendrick Lamar. You can look it up. What if I had moved from considering freedom in the abstract to freedom in the here and now? What if I'd considered freedom not in the sense of the individual, but in the sense of the collective? What if we truly become free by helping one another to become free? What if freedom is not being able to do what you want any old time? And what if freedom is not being someone who cannot change, which, come to think of it, doesn't sound like freedom, now that I think about it? What if we found that the cost of freedom was also freedom's blessing? What if freedom wasn't just another word? What if it was the promise of a world transformed? Promise of a world transformed. And so I ask you, what are your freedom songs? What are your freedom songs? And what other songs might you add to your freedom playlist? When you ask whether something is freedom or not, you might ask whether it sings. You might ask, when it sings, what does it say? For it will sing. It will sing. Amen. I look forward to being in dialogue and in conversation about your understandings of freedom. Amen and blessed be.
My freedom is not just about choices I have, and it's not about what's owned by me. My freedom depends on the choices I make, my choices that make others free. I earn what I spend, and I spend what I earn. In my lovely neighborhood, all that I give comes back to free me some more. My choices together, our choices for good. My freedom is not just about choices I have, and it's not about what's owned by me. My freedom depends on the choices I make, my choices that make others free. To drive freedom down, you just cut in line. To drive freedom up, you make someone feel fine. To drive freedom down, push people aside. To drive freedom up, just give them all a ride. To drive freedom down, you grab that last piece. To drive freedom up, you beg some more to please. To drive freedom down, scam easy money fast. To drive freedom up, do more than you were asked. To drive freedom down, you call your boss a jerk. To drive freedom up, now really do good work to drive freedom down. You keep hogging that ball to drive freedom up. A sure win for all. Now drive freedom up. I knew that you would. Now drive freedom up for good.
Each week, we hold a time in our service for sharing the joys and the sorrows that we bring with us into this community. If you email me or text me with your joy or your sorrow by Saturday morning at 9 a.m., I can include it in the service. This week, a couple members of our church reached out asking me to place stones for their joys or sorrows. First stone is for John and Ruth Leopold. John was in the hospital last week with an infection, but he responded well to antibiotics and is now home and feeling much better. We're glad you're home, John, and we hope for a continued speedy recovery. Joy Merman asked me to place this stone. Joy writes, "My 95-year-old father fell and broke his hip Monday last. He had surgery Tuesday afternoon at Duke Regional Hospital. He's been very confused and disoriented during the recovery process because of age-related cognitive impairment, though physically he's making good progress. Please," Joy writes, "if you could hold him in your hearts during this difficult time, I would be deeply grateful." A final stone is placed for all those joys and sorrows that we hold in our hearts. As we hold these spoken joys and sorrows, and the joys and sorrows of our own hearts, as we hold the pain of loss and grief and illness, as we hold the joys of grandparents reconnecting with grandchildren, the joys of hope that comes with the beauty of spring. Let us hold each person in our community in our heart this day. Amidst the prayers of our own hearts, we say, Amen.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I
be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I'd soar to the sun, I'd look down at the sea. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free. When I sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free.
Won't you join with me in saying the words by which we extinguish the chalice? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. I invite you to join with me in singing Shalom.
Shalom, my friends, shalom,